So, Canonical. Commercial sponsor of the Ubuntu Linux distribution. Been in business since 2004, founded by Mark Shuttleworth. If you're not familiar with him, he was the second space tourist. He was the founder of Thought. Had worked with Debian for a very long time. Prior to that, he founded the Thought company, sold to VeriSign for roughly 50 gajillion rand, which equates to about $600 million, and went and played around and decided he wanted to give back to the community that he helped build, and that's how Ubuntu was born. So they started business in 2004. That was their first release. Really focused on the desktops, huge following from a desktop perspective. Everything about it is free and will always be free. In every sense of the word. Free is in beer and free is in freedom. So you will not ever be asked for anything to get access to Ubuntu. You will never be asked anything to get access to Ubuntu updates. And you're free to contribute however you desire. And we really hope you do. So the other one is service and support is our business model. So because we don't monetize from a licensing perspective, we get support from a services perspective. I mentioned privately on, we got about 400 employees now. We're growing pretty much 100% a year. We doubled last year. We're now, like I said, roughly at 400 employees. Offices in London, this headquarters, Isle of Man, Taipei, Boston, and the Lexington area, as well as Montreal, where our support center is. We actually started partnering with RightScale in about 2009 when we really got deep into cloud computing. Met with Michael and Torsten in December of 2008 in Mountain View, and then they agreed to support Ubuntu as a platform, and we've been moving ever since. So you have write images for Ubuntu, both 8.04, I believe there's support for 9.04, 9.10, and 10.04 as well. So you can deploy on all three of those, or all four of those platforms. Although I believe 9.04 goes out of, or is out of support as end of life as far as Canonical is concerned. And then they've also created some packages. RightScale created right link packages to ease the management of existing images and help make Ubuntu a lot more manageable under the RightScale platform. So from a release management perspective, time-based, every 6 months. April and October, no matter what. Sometimes it's early, as in the 10.10. I don't know if next year will be late with 11.11.11, but we'll see what happens there. I doubt they'll do it late. We have an LTS every 24 months. So what happens now is we had an LTS in April of this year, and then we had a point release in October. We'll have a point release in April of next year, a point release in October of next year, and then we'll have another LTS, which is long-term support, release in the beginning of 2012. So 12.4, everybody follows the how we name them, right? So right now we're 10.10, which is 2010 October, so 10.10. The next release will be 11.04, so 2011 April. Every release is supported 18 months for the point releases, 5 years on the server for LTS releases, 3 years on the desktop for LTS releases. Obviously, we prefer that for production workloads. It's really designed to be an enterprise supported system. We'll support everything that's in main in that for 5 years on the server, as I mentioned before. So our cloud story started in April of 2009. We had worked with Eucalyptus before they actually became a company, while they were still a project at UC Santa Barbara. And the idea behind it was to, we knew cloud computing was good, was coming up very rapidly, very popular. RightScale was on the scene, EC2 was on the scene. You had GoGrid and FlexiScale, and Moso was out there doing stuff from a Rackspace perspective. And so what we wanted to do was pull something into Ubuntu, and right at that point, EC2 was a de facto standard. So that's where things kind of came about. So we wanted to bring the best of both worlds. The best guest OS, we were already the best guest OS from a VM perspective. We work the best on VMware and still do. We do work very well on a Hyper-V perspective as well from a Microsoft virtualization perspective. But then we also work really well in the KVM world, and I had chosen KVM for that default hypervisor. If you look right now through some of the cloud watching programs and you ask around, you'll see Ubuntu is probably one of the most widely used guests out there today. So it's very, very popular. It's popular on RightScale. It's popular in Rackspace. Rackspace says we're doing roughly 60% of their deployments are on Ubuntu from both a hosted and a cloud perspective. And when they acquired SliceHost, Ubuntu was almost exclusive on SliceHost from a VM perspective. So it's very, very popular from that perspective. The one interesting thing that we do with cloud is that we're really easy to use from a developer perspective. And so you do development and testing on Ubuntu, and then we've made it really easy to deploy. And so we're seeing right now a lot of development, a lot of testing done on Ubuntu, and then that same test and dev can be deployed very easily with little change. And you can go back and forth too. You can create a deployment in RightScale and deploy it in EC2. As far as I know, and I have never tried this, you can easily take that same deployment and do some work with it in a private perspective on Eucalyptus as well. So they support, we're one of the original supporters of being able to manage Eucalyptus environments. We put a button in there for RightScale that when you installed Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud with Ubuntu Server, you click that button and you can register that cloud with RightScale and then manage some aspects of deployment there. So the same image can go back and forth between EC2 on a private side and EC2 on the public side and Eucalyptus on the private side very easily. All right, so let's talk about what we do with EC2 today. So Amazon obviously has been the de facto standard. We started supporting it in 9.04. We had an image that we released with 9.04. Right after that in 9.10, we released an image for 8.04, which was fully supported by Canonical at the time. And with a lot of support from the community. I don't know if anybody knows Eric Hammond, but Eric with Elastic.com has done a lot of work with Ubuntu, had done most of the images prior to Canonical managing it before, and so he provided a ton of input and a ton of help from that perspective. And the community's been very supportive of what we're doing in there as well. So it's very, very widely used, and we've done significant improvements release over release. So let's talk about some of those improvements. One of those is what we call Cloud Init. So this was something that was started by Eric at Elastic. He had some tools that he had built to take advantage of user data and be able to put things into user data that got started up when when an instance was started from an image in EC2. So there's a couple of aspects of it. One of them is there's a boot hook aspect. So we can do a lot of stuff before anything even comes up within the instance that's run. The other one is that we've built it in such a way that we can run it in EC2, we can run it in the same image in Eucalyptus, we can run the same image in KVM without any change. The only difference really between KVM and running it in EC2 is that in EC2 it doesn't care what kernel's inside it, it runs a kernel externally. And when you move it over to a KVM environment, you need a kernel because it uses the kernel that comes with it. So we just kept the kernel in there. It makes the image a little bit larger, but it's not that significant. And so now you can boot, you can manage everything locally, run it in a KVM environment, do whatever you want to do, take that image and bundle it up and throw it up on EC2 and run the exact same image with no change whatsoever, especially now with the use of the PVOps kernel. So with PVOps, now we have the ability to do whatever kernel we want without having to manage it and have access to kernel and the commit rights to the kernel side in Amazon. They guard that pretty closely. So That's one of the big advantages. Another big advantage in Maverick versus Maverick's 10.10 versus what we had in Lucid. The other one is that we've improved the reporting and some of the bug logging that we can do through Cloud Init, through some of the tools that we've added in Maverick. So they mentioned the var log cloud init.log. So anytime something happens in that Cloud Init setup, it will log that to var log. Basically, what Cloud Init provides is a mechanism by which we can pass information through user data when the instance begins. So we have an image that we want to start. We pick an Ubuntu image. Cloud Init's a package that's installed already on the images in EC2. When we start that image, we can actually pass some information through user data into Cloud Init. And there's two variables that we can use there. If we do basically a shell variable, a hash bang and information, we can run a script. We could actually call a URL that has a script. As a matter of fact, Scott Moser has his information out there. Scott manages our images for Canonical for Ubuntu on EC2. He does all the builds for it. He's got a script that he does automatically. When he does some testing with it, he just adds these URLs in there and boom, it starts everything up automatically. And so you can do that, or you can have another script that's bang cloud-init, I believe, or cloud-config. And cloud-config expands on that a little bit further. Cloud.config allows us to send a lot more information to the user data. It's basically the metadata that we're passing through. And we can pass through a huge string of information. So we can still do URLs and stuff, but we can get a lot more detailed. We can do an apt-get update as soon as it boots. We can actually do things before the image is completely booted. So if we wanted to pass personally, you had your own specific SSH key that you wanted to pass over, you can actually pass that and add that to the Ubuntu user's authorized key so that you can use your own key material without having to create anything new. But bottom line is it's the ability to hook into the user data so that when the machine boots, you can pass information to it. So it's a real quick and simple way of if you're testing. I was talking to a gentleman a little while ago. If you wanted to, for instance, he uses a SIP tool, OpenSIP, I believe it was, but he wants to tweak it before he compiles it. He always compiles it. He doesn't use the binary packages. And he wanted to figure out a way that he could, tweak that, automatically compile it and install it so that when he clicked on run an instance, it comes up with everything you need. And so what I told him is like, well, gosh, you want to use Launchpad, do an SVN to that, use your commit or use your SVN locally and commit that to your Launchpad account. And then when you have all that done, we can set it up to compile it. So we've got the ability to create a package. Basically, you can set up all your scripts and we can create a package, throw it in a personal package archive on Launchpad. And then in that Cloud Init, we could add that personal package archive. We could do an apt-get update, add that personal package archive, run that install, do an apt-get install of that package, pass any configuration parameters we wanted to it, all in the amount of time it takes to boot that image. So now all I can do is launch that image with this Cloud Init information, and it will not only boot the image, but it'll pass my keys over to it. I can pull my keys out of Launchpad if I wanted to. I can add a PPA. I can add that package, have it all installed and configured, and then when I go to my image, however I access it, everything's right there. So it's very simple for me to just do that. So one of the things that we talked about with RightScale in this same vein was being able to make it a linked instance. And there's a few issues with that right now. One of the issues is that they want full control of user data. They're greedy that way. That's okay. We're working on that. And what that would allow us to do is we could do this exact same thing. We could actually run this image and make it set up in such a way that it'd be fully RightScale enabled from a dashboard perspective at boot. So this would allow you to have a little bit more flexibility, use another image. Even RightScale wouldn't have to manage those images individually. You could use an image that you like, that you have all set up. You could bundle it, have everything ready so that you could use it in a deployment. And that's basically what I did with 1010 with their dashboard. Is I went in and started a canonical image. 32-bit, 64-bit, didn't matter. Ran an update, added the right link package to it, deployed that out there. I then bundled that. You can clean everything up, bundle that image, and then you have that ready to be used within a server template. So I took I think there's a default multi-cloud template that has some Chef enablement in it. And I took that template, removed the crappy CentOS server, added in the Ubuntu server in the mix that I fully updated. It has all my new packages in it. And now I could use that as a deployment. So I've got everything set up. I've got my own little simple bundled image. I can go and run that through the RightScale dashboard and tweak and do whatever and deploy that a billion times, however I want to do it with my setup. So that's some of the things that you can do with Cloud Init. It's very, very powerful. It's pretty slick. If you look at how some organizations are using it, they're getting pretty unique about what they're doing. But bottom line is it allows them to do a lot more than what they could do before. Usually you would either use a right image that was there already set up image. It may be too big, too small, it may not have what you want, what have you. This allows you to tweak it. And now if you're a developer especially, you can tweak that template and just throw it in there, put a link to an HTTP site or whatever, throw that script in there every time you boot up an instance. And now you've got your machine exactly configured how you want it, and it takes you 2 minutes to test out whatever changes you make versus taking 10 or 15 minutes by tweaking that instance every time you run it. And that's what he means by seeding of metadata and user data. He's got these two URLs. So he basically just points to these two URLs. This sets up his SSH key and copies it to the user and does a couple other basic things. And I believe this one does more around configuring, doing an apt-get update, adding his PPA, and copying some of his packages that he wanted in there to Ubuntu, or to the instance. All right, so I spent 5 minutes answering your simple 3-word question.
I appreciate it.
Did that help?
Definitely.
It's very powerful, it's very cool. That's why I like to spend a little bit more time on it. Some other things that we did with these images, root file system is now ext4 by default. There is an Amazon tool called EBS Mount. Actually, it's not an Amazon tool. It's a tool that was created by Alon Schwartz at Turnkey. If you're not familiar with Turnkey, they create a lot of very slick, pre-made, pre-configured images that are based on Ubuntu. They're based in Israel. Two very smart guys that do a lot of really cool stuff from an image perspective. So you can go to them and get a fully pre-configured alfresco image that has everything you need to set up alfresco. You can go to them to get a really basic lamp stack that has everything fully configured. You fire it up and you have a lamp stack. And it'll run a KVM. It'll run in most hypervisors, KVM, Zen. It'll run on VMware. And they also have images on DevPay. It's free, but it is on DevPay, so they can do some tracking of it as well. So EBS Mount was created by Alon and Scott Moser. Scott's the guy who does the images for Canonical, to allow you to do basically mount all of your EBS mounts at one time. So you can do an EBS mount all, and anything you have that's in EBS that's available to that instance can be mounted automatically. So that's one of the things you could add in Cloud Init. So if you have a couple of EBS mount points that you wanted to just automatically run, you could set up this EBS mount script. It's just a Python script and run that. Yes, sir. The other one's BYOBU, I don't know how you pronounce that. That's another cool tool. It's Screen, basically. And if you're not familiar with Screen's kind of a text-based GUI, if you will, for the image for the server, and it's really slick. So if you run Biobu on your machine, you actually get the ability to cycle windows and create several different terminal instances, and you can see what's going on. You can even see the cost of your instance as it's running. And we do have the ability, since we're using PVOps in Ubuntu today, we can run a user-specified kernel now, really slick. You didn't have that choice before, so we can easily take advantage of that solution. If you're running Maverick right now, you've got this enabled. That's enough on that. So, just a couple quick things why it's good. It doesn't need that huge syntax set. Gives you some more flexibility. We can actually do an apt-get update and not worry about breaking things with kernel updates. We don't have to have access into, if you want to tweak the kernel, you can tweak the kernel however you want and run that kernel with Amazon's AKI. So you've got a lot of more freedom, I guess would be a better way of putting it, with the PVOps kernels than you did previously. Some other things, simple things, that just basic EC2 stuff, resource tracking, being able to use your own key pair now, micro instances, the idempotent instances, identity access management. Those are some of the features fully supported in Ubuntu. The only thing that we don't support from a guest perspective on EC2 is, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I know what it is the cluster stuff, because we don't support PV on HPM right now. That's coming, should be in 11.04. We'll fully support the Amazon cluster images.